The Pediatric Institute is focused on getting products developed for treating kids. There's a big gap in the field. There's a small market in pediatrics. It's hard to get products developed and approved for pediatrics, so the companies largely have ignored the area. It's an orphan market. We started the Institute to really focus on getting products developed for optimal treatment of kids. Pediatrics is about 5 to 10% of the healthcare market, and it's subdivided into 6 or 7 submarkets. From the preterm baby to the teenage mom are all considered pediatric patients. So any given product is looking at a very small market. And then on the development side, nobody really wants to see kids in clinical trials. And if they are, there are very strict controls for human subject protection. So this results in something companies just love, which is high cost, high risk, and uncertainty. So you throw that up against small markets, and they say, why bother? Most kids under the age of 6 or 7 really can't take pills, but most drugs are available as pills. So the hospital pharmacies take a mortar and pestle, literally, grind up pills, mix it with some kind of liquid, and put this in an oral syringe and present it to the kids. And this is United States of America, the year 2009. That's the standard of care in pediatric medicine. And there are similar stories on the medical device side where the clinicians need to take something that was made for some purpose in adult medicine, cut it, bend it, shape it, adapt it, or use it off-label. And so those are the areas that we're focused on. We're not really looking at, a new gene to solve the problem of cystic fibrosis. That's a very big item. That the traditional sources of innovation probably work fine for that. We're looking at things that really need adaptation for pediatric care, and are really small, require small investments, but have not been addressed. We had a grant from a company called Children's Medical Ventures, which sells products for neonatal intensive care, NICU. That's their business. And they were attracted with our idea of starting out with finding what the needs are and then working to generate innovation towards those needs and then develop products. So we have had a connection with 3 pediatric hospitals who are we represent and who help to fund us and who've given us access to their clinicians. We go in there, we have discussions with nurses, with doctors, with technicians, focus groups, interviews, and we find out what their needs are. And so we did this. We ended up with something like 170 needs that we came out of. We consolidated the information from the several hospitals and then verified it using a national market survey through one of these online companies, and then prioritized these needs based on that survey. We worked with a design engineering group to take 60 of these things and imagine solutions to them. And then we rank ordered the solutions based on 10 criteria that ranged from clinical impact to near-term product feasibility. We went back to our sponsor and showed them 10 ideas of product concepts. And then we and they selected 3 to go forward with. We went back to our original founding hospitals. We assigned 1 product to each hospital. And their clinicians and our engineer held several hours of intensive discussions to fully characterize the products that are needed. So we've gone back to the sponsor. They're delighted. And they're going to fund us to help them develop these 3 products. So one is these are for preemies, little tiny, delicate babies, and many of them have to be intubated for respiratory care. The passageways are very narrow and extremely delicate, and there's a lot of damage that's done in inserting the endotracheal tubes. So one of our projects is to design an endotracheal tube that the clinician can tell where it is when you're putting it in. A second is a handheld and small accessible device for being able to visualize arteries and veins, so that you don't have to stick these kids 6 or 7 times to take a blood sample or insert an IV tube or something like that, because that's very painful to them. The third, which is conceptually the simplest in some regards, but I think it's going to be the most interesting one. These little tiny babies in their first week or two of life have a very delicate skin. It's almost gelatinous. Yet at the same time, there's all kinds of things you have to stick on them for monitoring, for care. So you use tape. You pull the tape off, you pull the skin off. And so these babies come out with scars and pain and needing care. So we're working with some very creative people to come up with an adhesive product that sticks when you want it to and unsticks when you want it to without pulling the skin off. The other area that we're focusing on is reformulating drugs for proper administration to kids. And this is where we actually have a substantial collaboration right here in Kansas City with Children's Mercy Hospital, which has a world-class pediatric pharmacology group, and with the pharmacy school of the University of Kansas, which has got a whole drug delivery program they're developing. And they've done the research on the formulation for our first product to take something which is only available as a pill and put it into a form which is a crystal clear solution, sweet tasting and good shelf life. And this is going to be our first drug product. So we've been in business 2 years. We've got 4 products in development. And the next phase, as a nonprofit, some of these products will and have attracted corporate support and potentially investor support, but others may need to get the development stage funded by a source of money that does not require return on investment. The investors call this non-dilutive financing. We call it grants. And the sources of these grants potentially are some of the foundations that are focused on children with particular diseases. And then, of course, the federal government. Both the FDA has a certain orphan product development grant group, and the NIH, which is responsible for implementing what's called the Best Pharmaceuticals for Children's Act, has funds that can be directed towards product development. We're not really focused on discovery research. We're really looking at the application of known technologies. We're not trying to create something that's going to take 10, 20 years of development. It's more like hammering and sawing than like research discovery. And that's an important issue and very different from what I used to do in my previous job, which was to work with very innovative biology researchers and see what to do with the invention and discoveries they come up with, and then ultimately try to figure out if the world needed it. We're starting the other way around. What are the needs? And how do we quantify these needs? And how do we do the characterization of the kinds of products that would meet those needs before we do the invention? In fact, with these 3 products I mentioned, we haven't filed a patent yet. We haven't got the invention. All we've done is created a very precise and very multidimensional bullseye of what the product has to be, so that the engineering knowledge can then be applied in a very focused way to solve that problem at that price point with these human factor considerations. It's fair to say the Kauffman Foundation put me into business. I mean, I first met the Kauffman Foundation when I was here at a conference when I was still working as the Chief Intellectual Property Officer at Children's Hospital Boston, where I had done some pilot projects that were trying to get at this issue. And I met Lisa Mitchell, and she was intrigued, and she came to visit at Children's and met my staff and saw some of the projects, and we established a kind of a professional relationship. And then when my projects became a little bit too innovative for my host institution, I left. And for the first year, I was given what I call free room and board, an office and operating base by a venture capital firm in Boston. I was an entrepreneur in residence and maintained connection with Lisa. And then at a certain point, as I began to think of what the model was for going about this, because it wasn't really possible to think about it when I was still inside the institution. It had to be outside and recognize that this had to be done across a base of institutions, not a single one. That I, got the concept together, and I came back to Kaufman, and I could almost say that Lisa said, "Well, so when are you going to send us a grant proposal?" And it says, "Okay, now's the time," and I did, and Kaufman gave us a planning grant, and that planning grant gave me the chance to go around and talk to the top 25 pediatric hospitals around the country, and find a subset of them that could be aligned with this mission and had innovative leaders, were in good financial shape, and were intrigued to participate in this. I guess what I consistently do, and have learned through numerous careers to do, is to put something out there and see what happens without being afraid that it might be wrong, and to recognize that the people I'm putting it out to may know more than I do about it. And by doing so, without embarrassment, to collect their intelligence and come back with draft 2. In the nonprofit sector, we have to aggregate as many resources as possible, and not to have too much personal ownership in what the it is that you're doing, and being open to learning from and building with other people. I also have a sister-in-law who's a therapist, and she told me one day, the young people she counsels in their 20s are terrified of failing. She referred me to an article in Psychology Today which basically said that if you haven't failed, you don't know who you are, because you've never pushed yourself to your boundaries and passed. You don't know your boundaries. And for whatever reason, I've never really been afraid to fail. When I was at Children's Hospital Boston and I built this wonderful intellectual property office, I did this reflecting my background in education by creating a very thoroughly developed internship program where I brought these young people in their raw postdoctoral fellows and took them through 4 or 5 levels of experiential training with a background matrix of competencies, and coupling with that with some didactic teaching and then some of the critical skills like patenting and so on. And it was beautiful. I ended up with a staff of 16 people, and all but 2 of them were people that started out as interns, and they came from all over the world. And my dream for IPI is to do something similar, but with nurses and doctors to get released from their clinical responsibilities for a period of time, work intensively on one of these programs, and then go back to their institution in a kind of an enhanced leadership role in innovation. So I think that type of field experience in an entrepreneurial environment with a structured program and a commitment to mentorship is basically what's needed. And I personally, since I'm in my heart, I'm really a nonprofit guy, even though I spent some time in the for-profit world. I use the term entrepreneurship a little more loosely than some of my brethren in the investment and industry world do, because I think that innovation and making stuff happen, including process change and organizational change, is all within the ambit of what I consider to be included in the term entrepreneurship. I want to see how we actually measure the result of what we're doing, not by widgets and dollars, but healthcare impact. So how do we even think about asking the question, what's the result of what we're doing in terms of actually improved patient care? Because that's the purpose. That's why we're doing it. So how do you think about that? And how do you set in place a kind of evaluation system and monitoring system to answer that question? I'm interested in seeing how the methodology that we're using is applicable in the developing world. That's a different market. In fact, it's not even a market in some regards. It's a different environment. And so things will have to be done in a different way. But I think that's maybe my next career is in that arena.